The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Chris Garridini, the president and owner of Turnkey Technologies. I would like to thank you for joining us today. I know we've got more people joining, so you just get a short little bit of commentary from me this morning. But again, I want to thank everybody that's here. And I'd also like to reaffirm the Turnkey commitment to you, our customers. And again, my comment, we will never stop supporting Dynamics GP. For those of you that don't know me, I started in the 80s with Dynamics GP. There's me dating myself. So I've got a 30+ year love affair with that product. So not going anywhere. So quickly, agenda today. Again, the team that's going to present year-end closing tips. That's always helpful this time of the year as everybody has a year-end close coming up. And then we're going to be looking at some of the feature release details. And then there's going to be a tips and tricks session and a reporting session. So you got some great content from the team today. But just a few comments while I get a chance to talk to this audience. But it's been almost 2 years since this evolution in our industry. And most people are like, what evolution? Well, it kind of coincides with COVID. If you think about, organizations and changes that we all go through, and I'm just committing that, Turnkey's pushing ourselves. So we're pushing ourselves to evolve. And I just want to share some of those details because, part of this is me in a CEO group called Vistage that helps me go out of the box and bring ideas back. And as part of that process, we're actually doing traction at the office, which is a process to help us do a better job of defining who we are, how we differentiate, how we service our customers better. But some of the things I'd share is as we think about our values that have bubbled to the top, and the do it right, make it right. And it's important as our customers to hear that and know what drives our behavior. The second one was honesty, trust, and integrity. We're passionate about these things. The last one was teamwork. But those 3 bullet points really define the who we are, who the culture is, the types of people that are employed by the organization, the types of people that want to be here, that aspire to those values. From a purpose standpoint, it's interesting. The tagline had been there all along, but we came back to it. It's empowering competitive advantage. And as we think about what that means to our organization, and so why are we here? Sure, we're Microsoft Dynamics, but it's not all about Dynamics. It's about helping organizations like yourselves get to that point where you compete better. You compete because you're more efficient, you have better business processes. And so my comment that surrounds that is there's more we can do for your organizations. A couple comments about team. And again, as we think about this last couple of years with COVID, and everybody's heard about the Great Resignation. So we've had changes as well. Again, and it's hurtful for some, and it's challenging for customers as we reattach and reestablish our relationships. But just a few comments is we had a number of retirements. It's interesting, as an almost 28-year-old business, I have people that are aging out on me, and many people may have known Kevin Vogler, who retired at the age of 70, and Bill Schultz wants to retire. He's hanging on still, but Bill's been with us a long time, so great resources. Bill Draghi also wants to retire, and I think he's going to do that at the end of the year. But we had a few people leave the industry. You might have known Diane Sider, David Ozerski, Mike Sinclair, all took in-house jobs with different organizations. Very happy for them. But as you think about our long-standing team members, the seniors, Mike Shank, Sean Hunter, Laura Kane, you know those names. They've been around for 10+ years in the organization, still here leading the charge as seniors in our organization with those experiences. But to that point, we brought in new talent, and you're going to meet some of those today. Rich Parkinson is now the director of both Business Central and Dynamics GP, and brings a wealth of experience to the organization that we needed in levels of a customer engagement and staff work and so forth. But today you're going to meet Moda Goodwin, a senior GP consultant. She's presenting. Peter Vicari, another senior GP, who's with us today presenting. I know Sean Hunter is also presenting today. I mentioned him, but also we joined this year. We added Ron Monty, Brendan Link, a couple of technical professionals. So again, just the reaffirm, the commitment, the team, the depth that we have. And again, I encourage you, and I encourage my team to meet you and to rebuild these relationships. And again, my final comment is let us know how we can do more for you in 22. Ask for a planning session. We're not going to charge you for that. Any of us would be glad to engage with you in a conversation to help you plan your solution further, even myself. So again, enjoy the sessions today. Have a safe and happy holiday with your family and friends. And again, thank you for being a Turnkey customer. Team, take it from here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mona Goodwin, and I'm a senior consultant here with Turnkey. I've been working with a few of you that are attending today. So some of you have already met me, and I do look forward to meeting more of you in the coming year, and hope that I can serve your needs, answer your questions, or find someone that can. Today I'm going to talk about the year-end process that we're all getting ready to do, and walk you through the major steps that you need to keep in mind as you go through that. This is going to be a high-level summary, but if you need assistance with this year-end process, if you need more details about the where and the how and the when on anything that I cover today, then I invite you to reach out to me personally through my email, reach out to Turnkey Support, or reach out to Peter or Sean. Any one of us would be willing and able to help you through the year-end process. So as you get ready to start your year-end closing, there are two factors for the year-end closing, and one of those is the general ledger, and there's a separate process for payroll, and we'll talk about each one of those separately. But before you get ready to do your year-end, you need to do some preparatory steps. If you're using GP 2016, you will need to upgrade to GP 18 prior to year-end if you're printing 1099s, or if you're going to run your W-2s, if you have payroll in-house. So you'll need to do that. And the reason for that, there are a lot of changes to 1099s this year, and because GP 2016 is no longer a supported version, they're not releasing any updates to that. So the 1099 changes have table changes, and they have the form changes, and the updates to do those are only going to be released for GP 18. And for GP 2016, if you're running payroll, then you won't receive any tax table updates before you start to run payroll next year. So either of those scenarios, you need to get an update before you start these processes. If you're going to the year-end service pack, then all of the updates are cumulative. The most recent release that Microsoft, the most recent release was 18.4, which was released in October, and it's cumulative. So all prior features, hot fixes, etc., were in that release. And when you get this year-end update, if it's applied to your system, you would find yourself on the most recent version of 18.4 with the year-end service pack. So you would be up to speed and ready to go into next year. The update, if installed, must be installed on all servers and workstations, and does require some downtime. So if you've not already been talking to Mike or Brendan about those updates and getting those planned, then you would need to plan within your business cycle when you can have the server and the workstations all available for that GP install. So once you've got your system up to date and you're on 18.4, if you're running 1099s or payroll, the rest of the process applies to all businesses. You really need to plan that year-end close. For some businesses, especially those that are running payroll and or that are running inventory, that year-end close can cover a span of time versus being done in just one day, for reasons that we'll talk about when we get over to inventory. So you'll need to select an optimal time during your business cycle, whether you want to make sure that you're not in the middle of your month-end close, that you have all the data collected that you're going to need before that year end, that you've got the available staff. It is the year end, so we're working around holidays, and if you're going to need any turnkey support through that year end, get in touch with us and make sure that we do have someone who's available to assist you with that. Once you've got your timing and you know what your business cycle looks like and when would be the prime time for you to do your year-end close, you need to develop a work plan. So as we go through the steps that today, look at those steps that are applicable to your business. Make sure that you make a note of the steps that you would be required to complete, so that then you can develop a work plan around those steps on the specific days that you plan to do your year-end. And always create a contingency plan. Once getting into that year-end close, if you find that you've made a mistake that you can't just journal back out, you may need to restore the data. So, or you may need to move to a different time frame. If you have people that are gone on the days that you planned for, if there's an error, if there's a systematic error during the year end, during the checklist that we'll talk about, then you want to have a contingency plan, and that's got to include having that backup that you can restore so that you can just resume normal business and then decide on another date to complete the process. Before you do your year end, there's a lot of preparatory steps that you need to take in your system even aside from the year-end updates that are required for the the systematic updates that are required for the 1099 and payroll. And the first thing you want to do is data preservation. So you've got to back up all the data and the program files. You may have a backup of your data, but go ahead and get a backup of your program files as well, and that would be your GP directory, which is usually on your C drive of your server, unless you've had us install it elsewhere, but the default would be on the C drive. I always like to get a copy of those program files just in case, so that if you ever have to put anything back, you can put it back exactly as it was. Another step that not every business performs, but that is a good idea to perform quarterly and before the year end, especially if you've got a high volume of data, is to run those checklinks procedures. And checklinks, if you don't know where they are, that you do have to be an administrator, you have to have access to run those, but they're in the GP maintenance or GP dynamics and under the maintenance, and there's a procedure called checklinks. And that checklinks will go out and you can select per module, and you can even select specific tables. And what it's going to do is a data integrity check. And it's a really good thing to do in order to make sure that you don't have stranded records or partial records or anything of that nature that might interrupt that year-end process, especially as you start going to try to close things like inventory. Stranded PO receipts can cause problems. If you have to do any revaluations and you've got stranded records out there, those types of things can be a hindrance, and the checklinks process will find them. Now, if you run the checklinks procedure and you get a report that tells you no errors were found, then you're good to go. However, you may run that checklinks procedure and then get a report that tells you that it repaired something. And checklinks finds something wrong, it will go ahead and repair it. It will do things such as remove stranded records that appear, partially in one table or the other. It depends on what it is. Or it may create a batch for you for records that appear like they crashed during posting, and maybe you need to just go delete that batch. And so it'll piece back together based on what it finds in those tables. And you don't get an option on those changes. It's just going to go ahead and do it when you create that. And if your checklinks takes a long time to run, you're not going to want to repeat the process. So it's a good idea after you run that procedure, especially if there were any corrections, to go ahead and get a fresh backup. And that way, if somewhere along the way during your year-end close, you have to start over, you don't have to rerun that, time-consuming checklinks procedure. And if your year-end closing process occurs over a period of time, over multiple days, then make sure that you're getting backups before and after those year-end close procedures daily or on each day that you perform them, so that you've always got a before and after. And it's probably a good idea for a lot of you who run those backups, if you have those nightly maintenance tasks set up on your SQL server. Sometimes those tasks are going to go through, and depending on what the timing looks like on those, they may delete your backups, every 2 days or once a week. And if that's the case and you've made a backup and next week you need to go back and look at it, it may be gone. So take those backups that you did before your year-end process or after you ran your checklinks procedure and store them elsewhere so that they don't get removed in that nightly cleanup process. Now, before you do complete your year-end, once you've got your data preservation, you've got to make sure that the system is ready, because once you close the year, you've got to be able to move on into the next year. So the first thing you're going to do is to go into GP and make sure that your new fiscal year has been created. And you'll do this through the tool Set Up Company Fiscal Periods. And generally, this is going to be someone in a management level position that has access to this screen. You'll go create your periods. Your fiscal periods are going to create just like they had the prior year based on what you've set up. So make sure you've got the first day of your fiscal period as well as the last day and the number of periods, 12 or 13, whatever it is that you use. And you just hit calculate and it will go ahead and create your new fiscal year with the periods open. Make sure that those periods are open. Many of you are probably familiar if you routinely close the periods in order to prevent any posting in future or prior periods, then you may need to open or close those. You'll also want to go to make sure that history is being maintained for your system. By default, it is typically being maintained for accounts and transactions, but go ahead and go to Tools, Setup, Financial, look in the General Ledger again, and right here where I've highlighted Maintain History, make sure that you're maintaining history for those accounts and transactions so that you've got that audit trail that you want for this process. And then also, because before you start to, and this inevitably happens every year with someone, with a client somewhere, you want to go and look at your accounts and you want to make sure that they all have the correct posting type and typical balance. And if you don't run this process and you do have some account out there that has the incorrect posting type, balance sheet or income statement, then it's going to be treated at the year-end process, going to retained earnings or carrying over those beginning balances based on the posting type that you have there. So go do a routine check there and check all of those balance sheet and income statement accounts before you get started. And you're also going to want to verify your retained earnings account. Especially if you've done a new implementation of Great Plains. Again, that is in the setup for the general ledger, and it's right there, as you can see, highlighted on the in the center of the screen. And if you're closing to divisional account segments, then make sure that you've got that set up properly as well, and verify where you have all of those fields directed to. It would be a lot easier to do these couple of steps right now than it is to try to reverse those transactions after you've already processed, and it may prevent you needing that backup that we talked about earlier. So once you've done that data maintenance and checked and verified your system is set up and ready to properly do that year-end close, then you've got year-end closing procedures for different subledgers. It's important to know, and very confusing for some people because GP is quite a large system. Well, what am I going to close? What requires a close? And the steps, it gets very confusing to know which module to go to and where not to. So it's important to know the order of close for the subledgers, as well as to know which modules don't require a year-end closing process. So when you do your year-end closing steps, and because of the way that the subledgers feed through each other on up to the general ledger, you need to close those in order. And the first thing is going to be inventory management, and then receivables, payables, fixed assets, and general ledgers. So if you view it sort of as a ladder, you're climbing that ladder all the way back up to the general ledger. And the modules that do not require year-end closing, because they're ancillary modules that feed into these subledgers, are going to be sales order processing, purchase order processing, the bank reconciliation, multi-currency. Human resources is not a transactional ledger, so there's nothing to close there. Project accounting, service call maintenance, management, and preventative maintenance. And the reason that I have an asterisk there for sales order processing and purchase order processing is that while you don't have a year-end closing process per se for those two modules, there is a reconciliation process that you are required to do in those two modules as a part of the inventory management closing process. And we'll talk about that when we talk about inventory management. Now, for all of the ledgers that we just talked about that require closing, there are a few general steps, and those general steps are performed for all ledgers. And then for some of the ledgers, such as inventory management, there's an expanded set of steps. So we're going to talk about the general closing procedures first. Obviously, before you close, you want to make sure that you've collected, entered, and posted all transactions into each one of those subledgers. And it's important to get those transactions posted. so that you've got everything where it needs to be prior to running that general ledger closing. So make sure your subledgers are complete and thorough, all your invoices are entered, checks posted, etc., those types of things that you want in prior to the year end. Print all of the relevant reports, and it's really, really important to get those, as most of you know, to get those trial balance reports closed, because if you're going to want to go back and look at everything after you've done your closing, then your trial balance is what you're going to want to go back and compare to. Make sure that after you've done these steps in all of the subledgers that you have a backup, which you're going to hear me iterate over and over, and close the fiscal and calendar years for those subledgers, and close the fiscal period for the series. So closing the fiscal period is a matter of going back over there to the fiscal period setup. We know that we've done everything we're going to do in that subledger for the year, and make sure that you close those periods so that nothing else comes through while you're in the middle of your closing process. And then once you've done that for your subledgers, make a final backup. For inventory, as I noted for you, there are some additional steps that you need to complete. And that's just the nature of inventory. And it's really sort of a beast. And this is one of the big ones that's going to interfere with your year-end closing plans. Inventory, you've got to do the stock counts. And if you've got a large physical inventory, that's a lot more difficult to do than, it appears. So you've got to plan that physical inventory count. You also are going to need a contingency plan for any changes that occur in that inventory between the time that you do that physical count and the time that you close and resume using the inventory. So one of the things you're going to want to do is going to want to go to the routines for inventory and reconcile all inventory quantities. And what that's going to do is going to look at all of those items that if you're looking at an inventory card, you're going to go look and see all of the items that are on order, outstanding, that type of thing, and it's going to make any corrections to those and give you some feedback. Also, I told you that for the sales order and purchase order processing, that you would have a reconciliation process for those that's related to the inventory closing, and that's where this comes in. And you're going to want to go do a routine of reconciliation on the SOP and POP. And that's because those sales order processing and purchase order processing transactions directly replenish or diminish your inventory. And so you'll want to close those in order. You're going to want to do sales order processing, purchase order processing, and prior to reconciling your inventory. Then you're going to want to get a complete physical count of your inventory once you've reconciled it, and post any adjustments that you have. It's good time, since it's the end of the year, to do any item maintenance. So if you've got discontinued items that you want to get rid of, this is a good time to do that. That's either in utilities or in routines. I can't recall off the top of my head. And it's a time when the standard cost is updated on items. So there's a utility NGP to go ahead and update those standard costs. And if you need assistance running that, then feel free to contact one of us. So after inventory is done, you've got your payables closing. And because, of course, you've got 1099s, there is a few extra steps to do in payables outside of the general steps that you do for most subledgers. You're going to want to capture a vendor period analysis report and print and verify the 1099 statements using that 1099 window and edit list. And what you're going to look for are going to be a number of things. You're going to make sure that the 1099 is properly classified for the vendor, and you're going to want to look to make sure that all amounts that are 1099 required have been marked as such. So if you've got any transactions for vendors that have not been marked as 1099 transactions and you need assistance in getting those reclassified so that they print correctly, if you've got vendors who were not marked as 1099 vendors and should be, then and you need assistance with that, contact us about that as well. And you'll close the tax periods for the year. In for the sake of the 1099 data capture. The fixed assets has a few additional steps as well, and that has to do with collecting the depreciation for the year. So make sure that your assets are depreciated through the last day of the current fiscal year, because you can't specify the day, even if it's not quite December 31st, you can specify that date in the depreciation process. And for that depreciation, if you have any assets that had not been depreciated for any number of periods during the year, when you run that depreciation process, it does do a catch up through the year. And be aware of that if you had any assets that were marked as, out of, what's the word I'm looking for? If you had any assets that were marked off as inactive during the year and they've been reactivated, that depreciation is going to accumulate for the entire year. So run that depreciation, validate it, and then you can go on to verify that your fixed assets calendar is built correctly for the upcoming year, and that all quarters are set up correctly for all fiscal years. And then you'll be ready to move on to the general ledger. So after having done all of the general procedures, as well as any additional procedures required for the inventory, payables, and fixed assets, then you should have all of your subledgers ready to go with everything posted, subledgers closed, and not receiving any new transactions, and you're ready to close your general ledger for the year. So for the general ledger, you're going to collect any final adjusting entries that you have for the year after reviewing all of your reports. If your final entries are not available, they can be posted to a closed year. Very often, I've had clients who don't post the closed year yet because they're waiting, or don't close the current year yet because they're waiting for adjusting entries. But you can go ahead and go through that closing process so that you move into the next financial reporting period, and you can always post adjusting entries now to a closed year, so there's no reason to delay. You can go ahead and print your final detailed trial balance. That is going to be your historical record that you're going to come back and compare to for peace of mind and for any reconciliation issues that you have after the year has been closed. Print your final year-end financial statements that you'll be using. Make sure that all users exit out of GP, and from the SQL server is the recommendation for actually running that fiscal year close, and that's for resources, just because the SQL server is going to tend to be more powerful. So if you have access there and you can have that run from the SQL server, then that's going to be the way to go. Once you're done, you'll want to generate a new trial balance and validate everything. Make a final backup, of course, and also make sure that you, just like the others, take that backup and store it elsewhere in case it needs to be restored. Even if you can't restore a backup, say you're a week into the new year and you can't restore because you don't want to overwrite, the transactions that have taken place in the past week, you can always restore that to a test company for, comparison sake, and for being able to look at the before and after, even if you don't restore it back to the live company. So take that back up, put it somewhere else for safekeeping. So for verify that the fiscal periods are closed and that your year has been marked as historical. So once you've gone through closing the fiscal year, then you should be able to go back out to the company in the fiscal periods, and right here where you see it highlighted on my screen, the current year should be marked as historical, and all of the series should be closed for each period. If that's not marked as a historical year, then something happened during that closing process and it has not completed, you may need to contact us for support. So check that right away without delay after the process is finished to make sure that that's marked. It'll be a lot harder to go backward if you've already started to do transactions in the new year and we find out that your year did not close or did not close properly. Now, the payroll year end is different and separate. and because you've got to create those wage file reports, get your everything ready for your ACA reporting and your W-2s. So if you're using GP payroll, then there's a real timing issue. You have to plan it carefully with the new year tax updates. One of the things that generally is confusing is that there are two parts to the year-end updates that Turnkey provides. One of those is a programmatic update. So if you've got form changes, dictionary changes, table changes for SQL, things like that, that's part of that service pack install that we do. And it does not include the tax tables. So the tax table update for payroll is a separate maintenance task. And those are, it's a tax table. It's just a table that's brought in and it updates the values in that tax table that's used for calculating payroll tax. So after your last payroll for the year and before your first payroll for the new year, what you want to do are these steps right here for payroll. You want to verify that all the payroll runs for the current year are completed. You'll complete your month-end and period-end procedures for payroll and get a backup of your data. And you're going to want to create the year-end wage file report. The year-end wage file, if you run it and then you find out that there's an error with it, you know, you go through and evaluate it as you should. You can always rerun that year-end wage, make corrections, and then rerun that year-end wage file. You're going to want to verify your W-2 and 1099-R statement information and print those statements, all the required statements that you have, W-2s, W-3s, 1099s, ACAs, and create the electronic file. A number of people are using green shades, so just interject those green shades procedures there if that's the case, if you're not printing those in-house. Another task that you may want to complete while you're doing this payroll year end is to archive any inactive employees. And then prior to running your first payroll for 2022, you want to install the payroll tax updates for 2022, okay? And those, I read a document yesterday. I want to say they were going to make one more change. I think they're almost ready to roll out those new tax updates, or at least deliver them so they can be installed beginning late in December. So once you've closed your general ledger and you've got your payroll processes run, your new payroll tax tables are installed, you're ready to begin working in your new fiscal year. Does anybody have any questions on the items I just covered? Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. Again, if you have any questions, then feel free to contact me, contact Turnkey Support, contact any of the consultants that you see in today's presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this off now to Peter Vicari to talk to you about new features and functions in GP.